I was standing in the kitchen doorway trying not to cry over a beet salad. It wasn't the beets, though they did look like something you'd pull from a surgery tray. It was the girl humming beside them, my 17-year-old daughter Ava, whose entire body glowed with that adrenaline-lit purpose you only see in cooking finalists and brides with second thoughts. She'd been up since 5 and 5 the day before, and 5 the day before, that rising to chop, braise, whip, remake, sanitize, and steam clean the floor. Because in her words, it had been giving health inspector energy. She'd printed menus and hand-lettered 23 name cards, set fresh flowers in low bowls so people could see one another across the table, and adjusted the dimmers until the room looked like a warm, real restaurant, and not a house playing dress-up. She'd curled her hair. Her apron was spotless. The room smelled like thyme and butter and some sugared thing I couldn't name, but felt expensive just to inhale. When my phone buzzed, I stepped into the hall as if to take a call, but really it was to stop my hands from shaking. The family group chat, normally a cemetery of Happy Easter texts and blurry casserole photos, now held a new message from my father. We've decided to celebrate at a restaurant. It's adults only. No punctuation, no apology, just that flat verdict of we. For a long breath, I thought it had to be a joke. Then I noticed the photo attached my parents and sister at a long table in a downtown dining room. My mother beaming, my father raising a glass, my niece and nephew both barely 18, already eating. My blood went cold, then hot. I called my father. He answered on the second ring, cheerful. "You get the message I asked if they were truly at the restaurant." "Yep. Menu looks great. Everyone's here." He paused, concerned for exactly 1 second, then told me to tell Ava not to take it personally, that she could freeze the leftovers, that the waiter was here. He hung up. My mother answered with a sigh when I called her. "Honey, don't start," she said. "We thought it would be more convenient. It's not safe to eat food cooked by a child." Ava wasn't 5. She'd taken classes, built a menu around allergies, borrowed a cake turntable to practice frosting lines. "That's nice," my mother said. "But it's not real cooking." I hung up to keep myself from screaming. I called my sister, hoping she'd been left out of the decision, and might say, "Wait, did they really do that?" Instead, she told me I was guilting everyone that Ava was dramatic, and we weren't going to be her test subjects. The word test subjects made my jaw clench, like she'd called my daughter a lab rat. I turned around to find Ava's eyes on my phone. She took it from my unresisting hand, scrolled, and found the photo. Her face went still, crumpling inward, without tears or sound, like something inside her had given up. She dialed my mother. I watched her nod, then stop nodding, then place the phone carefully on the counter, as if it were fragile glass. She looked at the cake, 3 tiers piped rosettes. "Happy 67th Grandma," in dark chocolate curls, and didn't say a word. I used to believe the worst pain was seeing your child cry. I learned that day it can be watching her try not to, because she doesn't want to make you feel worse. Something hard in me clicked into place. I wouldn't let them define her night or end it. Not this time. While she stared at the cake, I felt my phone buzz again, an automated charge alert. My business card, the one my parents sometimes borrowed in a pinch, had just been charged $327.90 at the very restaurant where they were celebrating. They had erased my daughter's work and made me pay for the eraser. I laughed, a sharp, involuntary sound that tasted like metal. Then I started moving. I called my husband, told him I needed him home now. Then I called everyone else, neighbors who'd lent sugar and a hand with the fence. My cousin Sam, the one who got left out for being too political, translation tells the truth. Parents from Ava's old robotics team, a woman I'd met once at a charity bake sale, the receptionist from my dentist's office. A friend of a friend who mentioned she covered food for a local blog. I told them exactly what had happened. My daughter cooked for 3 days for her grandmother's birthday. They ditched her. She made 23 meals. I need 23 people who can eat. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. To my shock, people came. They pulled into the driveway with wine and tulips, with teenage sons in tow, and grandmas in cardigans with appetite and outrage, and something I didn't realize we had until that moment, a community. Ava whispered, horrified, "Mom, what are you doing?" I told her this wasn't pity, it was defiance. We dragged out folding tables, found extra chairs, lit the candles she'd arranged so carefully. The first wave of guests settled just as the door opened, and a woman with a camera bag slipped in. She introduced herself as a friend of a friend food journalist and asked if she could taste a few things. Ava froze. I said yes and handed her a plate. The journalist took notes, asked about ingredients, photographed the cake as if it were a museum piece. "She's better than some professional chefs I've reviewed," she murmured to me. Tell her that I said, and then I told Ava myself. When the room went quiet, it wasn't silence, it was reverence. Ava stepped from the kitchen with the first coarse cheeks, still pink eyes, still a bit wet but jaw set. She served her menu, no watered-down version, no apologies. Lavender glazed carrots with toasted sesame and citrus, duck with pomegranate reduction for the carnivores, and a wild mushroom ferrado for my father's mushroom aversion left aside because she had planned for that too. Diabetic-friendly pear tarts rested under glass. People sighed, they murmured, they clapped by the main course. By dessert, someone stood and toasted the girl who had cooked a feast, been kicked down, and refused to quit. She received her first standing ovation in our dining room. After midnight, I tucked her on the couch with a blanket and scrolled my phone with hands that still smelled faintly of rosemary. A link arrived from the journalist, a feature already posted, the birthday that wasn't how a teen chef served 23 after being abandoned. It praised Ava's food and told the story without names, but with enough detail for anyone who knew us to connect the dots, including the charge to my card. Within hours, the comments multiplied. "Where can we taste her food? Who leaves their granddaughter like that?" Sometime before dawn, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is the house paused in a strange morning stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath just before the pounding began. I peeked through the curtain and almost laughed. They had come. Type continue to receive the next part. They didn't wait to be invited in. My father pushed past me the second I opened the door. My mother in his wake, my sister half a step behind, arms crossed like a stage direction. "You need to fix this," my father snapped. My mother's voice came sharpened to a hiss. "Do you know what you've done to our reputation?" My sister didn't speak at first. She was busy arranging her face into the expression of someone burdened with other people's drama. I crossed my arms to keep them from shaking. "What I've done?" I asked. They marched to the kitchen as if it were theirs. My mother spat that we had told the media they abandoned Ava. I told her a journalist had eaten dinner in our home and told the truth. They were gentle, I added, considering. My father jabbed a finger at me. Church friends had read it. The neighbors had read it. His golf group wasn't answering his messages. "Devastating," I said, and watched his cheeks color. My sister finally found her voice thin with faux calm authority. "You need to issue a correction," she said. "Say it was exaggerated and taken out of context." I asked her if someone had hacked their thumbs to send that text from a restaurant. If I had hallucinated a charge for 300 times 4? If Ava had imagined the photos they'd posted from their adults-only celebration. My mother's voice cracked. She made us look like monsters. I shook my head. "No. You did that yourselves." The volume rose like a sudden storm. "She's just a child and already weaponizing the internet." She humiliated her grandmother for attention. "You raised her wrong." The worst sentence was a quiet one. My mother turned toward the hallway where Ava stood silent and small and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself." I do not remember moving. 1 second, I leaned on the counter. The next, I stood between them and my daughter. That's when my husband came home. He took one look at our faces and planted himself like a wall. "Out," he said. My father scoffed. "This is a family matter. This is my home. You came here to yell at a 17-year-old who made you dinner. You don't get to hurt her twice." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. They deflated faster than I would have believed possible, turning brittle and small in our kitchen's bright light. My sister muttered something about legal action because there is always someone who thinks a lawsuit can varnish over a moral stain. They slammed the door. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of breath we'd been holding all night. Mom, Ava whispered, looking out the window. "Why are there phones?" Across the street. Jeff, the neighbor who ran the local Facebook group and had once live-streamed the block party, stood on his lawn, holding up his phone. 2 more people were doing the same. I waved at Jeff in a way I hoped conveyed hello, and also post that, and watch me set your compost bin on fire. Too late. Before noon, a clip circulated online. The grandparents from that viral teen chef story just showed up at her house and screamed at her. The internet did what it does, fed itself on outrage until it burned hot. Comments arrived like hail. "Imagine being this bitter over a cake." They sound like B-list movie villains. Who yells at a kid who cooked them dinner? The kindest thread was a long list of people describing the moment they'd cut off family, who kept confusing love with control. I braced for backlash that never came. Instead, my phone filled with messages from old friends and polite strangers. A chef from a respected restaurant wrote to invite Ava to stage this summer. Someone from a culinary school admissions office said her application would get a careful look when the time came. A woman who'd eaten with us the night before asked if Ava could cater a small anniversary dinner. When my parents texted again, the tone had shifted. "First, you've ruined us. Then we will take legal action if you don't issue a correction." And finally, my personal favorite. "This is elder abuse." I blocked them. I deleted the card they used. The particular brand of theft where your love becomes someone else's entitlement would not happen again. That week, I posted a single sentence. "We stand by every word, and we're done protecting people who hurt our daughter." It felt like unclenching a fist I hadn't realized I'd been holding since childhood. The consequence came not to us, but to them. Invitations dried up. Church ladies who loved a performance of grace lost their appetite for it when the curtain rippled, and we all saw the pulleys. My parents told acquaintances they wanted a quieter life, and soon moved 2 towns away. My sister's public concern curdled into private resentment once the sympathy likes ran out. At home, we returned to ordinary magic. Ava tested recipes and tried out a tiny tripod for filming. She laughed again. Not louder, exactly steadier. It was a revelation to learn that clamor can be replaced by quiet, and quiet can be full. The night before she mailed her first college application, she brought me tea and asked if the essay was too honest. It was about what you owe the people who raise you and what you don't. She was worried it sounded ungrateful. I read her words about polishing silver no one would use, and cooking meals for people who arrived already full, about making something beautiful and being told it wasn't real because you made it with your own hands, and about how sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who refuses to see you is to step out of their line of sight and build a life that doesn't require their permission. "It's honest," I told her. "Keep it." She slid the envelope into the outgoing mail with a seriousness that made my throat ache. A month later, an acceptance arrived from the program she'd been whispering about for years, as if naming it too loudly might scare it off. The offer wasn't a miracle. It was the result of an oven-warmed persistence few people had bothered to notice until they could no longer ignore the glow. Type, continue to receive the next part. By spring, Ava wore her chef's whites like armor she'd earned, not a costume she'd borrowed. She staged at the restaurant, whose chef had reached out hands steady on knives that looked enormous when she first picked them up, and normal a week later. She came home late and smelled like smoke and citrus and long hours. I learned the rhythm of working kitchens just by listening the clipped music of Behind Hot the Hush after a rush. The inside jokes you only understand if you're there when the shallots hit the pan. The journalist who wrote the first piece visited the line one night and messaged me later. Your daughter's plating is better than half the sous chefs here. I forwarded it to Ava, who rolled her eyes and smiled into her pillow. The night before her 18th birthday, she baked herself a small lemon cake with a ridiculous crown of candied violets. For practice, she said, which is how artists describe joy. We ate it with forks straight from the plate and didn't make a wish. We didn't need wishes. We had plans. The family we still had, the chosen one we'd rushed into the house on that first ruined night, had found us in a deeper way since. The receptionist from my dentist brought her grandmother for supper. My cousin Sam came by on Sundays to help my husband fix the fence. Neighbors lent us their old stockpot and later brought it back full of soup. Even Jeff, the live stream enthusiast, knocked on our door with an apology and a tray of lasagna his wife had made. We were wrong to film, he said. We got swept up. I'm sorry. We accepted because forgiveness, like dough, is easier to work when it's warm. My parents drifted into their new life in a town with fewer eyes and more excuses. Sometimes the silence felt like relief. Sometimes it felt like a bell I couldn't unhear tolling for a relationship I wished had ever existed in the way I'd pretended it did. Therapy helped me untangle the old knots at the center of those feelings. Imagine a ledger, my therapist said. Whose entries have you been carrying? Whose debt are you paying off? The ledger became my private metaphor in the weeks that followed. Every time I caught myself justifying the unjustifiable, a childhood of being the second, the unplanned, the one with nice little side things, instead of real accomplishments, I pictured the ledger and closed it. One day in early summer, a letter arrived on heavy stationery. My mother's handwriting addressed it. I opened it at the counter where the beet salad had waited all those months ago. The letter said a great deal without ever arriving at the sentence I'd once begged for. It said we had misunderstood. It said they had worried about food safety, as if that hadn't been said with contempt in the first place. It said public humiliation was unacceptable in any family. It asked us to issue a statement that would reset the narrative. I sat there and held the paper like it was too hot. Ava came in hair damp from a post-shift shower, reading a text from a classmate. I slipped the letter back into its envelope and slid it into a drawer where warranties and appliance manuals go to die. Everything okay? Ava asked. I told her the truth. A little old pain had knocked, and I'd decided not to open the door. The summer unfolded in small triumphs. Ava catered a dinner for 12 in a backyard scented with citronella and laughter. She burned the first batch of almonds, started again without drama, and no one even noticed except the two of us, which is its own kind of miracle. She posted a step-by-step video of that lemon cake and woke up to 1,000 new followers and a DM from a culinary mentor she adored. She learned to stand on a mat to keep her knees from aching, to stretch her hands between shifts, to breathe deeply over a pan when anxiety frayed her focus. We updated our home kitchen with hooks that actually held the heavy pans, not because anyone told us we were real enough to deserve them, but because we used them every day. On a Saturday afternoon, I drove past my parents' old neighborhood and found myself making a slow loop past the church where my father had once held court in a cardigan with elbow patches and an opinion on everything. The bulletin board listed a sermon series on reconciliation. I parked and watched people file in old friends, a few new faces. For a moment, I felt the old pull to go in and sit down and pretend that reconciliation could be ordered like an entree and served in an hour. Instead, I drove to the farmer's market where Ava was comparing peaches and arguing with a vendor about the sugar content of honey at different points in the season. She grinned when she saw me. "Taste this," she said, pressing a slice of summer into my palm. I tasted it, and just like that was back in a world where sweetness belonged to those who showed up and stayed. The article that had started everything continued to ripple outward in ways I couldn't predict. Sometimes it meant nothing, just a new follower or a kind note. Sometimes it meant a woman in a parking lot stopping me to say she'd finally resigned from being her family's unpaid emotional accountant. Once, it meant a furious email from a stranger who accused us of tearing apart the fabric of family life. If the fabric can be torn by refusing to be abused, I wanted to write back, it wasn't fabric, it was cobweb. I didn't respond. Life was busy and generous. Ava left early, most mornings came home late, and still managed to sit on the back steps with me at dusk and describe her favorite part of service, the quiet electricity, just before the first plate leaves the pass. "It's like holding your breath together," she said, and then letting it out as one. One humid evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my sister on the porch, arms folded. She looked smaller, not physically, but in the way a story in which she'd always been the protagonist had suddenly given her fewer lines. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped outside and pulled the door mostly shut. She launched into her speech how they never meant to hurt Ava, how we had blown things out of proportion, how our public stance had cost them friends. Her eyes shone with tears I recognized well, but not for their source. They were the tears of someone upset by consequences, not by the harm that caused them. I asked her the question I'd practiced in therapy. "What do you want to be true that isn't?" She blinked, then looked away. "That we're still a family," she said. "We are?" I told her, in the sense that the DNA test won't change. But the part of family that is choice, that part has rules. If you want back in, you have to be safe. Safe for Ava, safe for me. She nodded once, a tremor of something like humility crossing her face. "What would that look like?" "An apology," I said without the word but. "Restitution for the charge you put on my card. A plan for making sure you never do this again, to her or to anyone." She bristled, then caught herself. "That's a lot. So is what you did." We stood with cicadas sawing the air into pieces and the light going gold. "I'll think about it," she said. "Do," I answered, and let the door close gently between us. Type, continue to receive the next part. The fall, I drove Ava to campus. The trees wore red like a dare. We hauled bins up 3 flights and made a bed that would not be slept in much, but would be cherished just the same. On the bulletin board above her desk, she pinned a photo of that dinner, the one where she served 23 people who answered a summons, and tucked a screenshot of the article behind it like a talisman. She hugged me twice before I left, and I drove home with the radio off, rehearsing the quiet I would keep in the house so the space didn't echo. It turned out to be easier than I feared. A new rhythm took root: texts about stock reductions and anthropology essays, photos of blistered tomatoes, and a cast iron pan that became hers by use. On my end, work hummed. I ran my not real nice little side thing with steady hands, and clean books took joy in shipping orders that smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Sometimes the ledger in my mind tried to crack open, but I closed it gently and kept going. One misty afternoon, a letter arrived from the culinary program, this time addressed to Ava, but forwarded to me because she had put my name as alternate contact. I opened it with permission. Inside was an invitation, a small grant for student-led community dinners awarded to proposals that centered story as much as food. Ava had written about the second table, the one you make when the first one disappears. She planned to cook monthly meals for students who couldn't go home for holidays or didn't want to, and to invite local elders who'd once been told their kitchens weren't real to tell stories while the soup simmered. the grant covered ingredients. The rest would be labor and love. I sat at the counter and cried like a woman who'd finally learned what her tears were for. The same week, a voicemail from my father appeared, the first in nearly a year. It was short and weary. "We're moving again," he said. "Your mother isn't well. We'd like to talk." I listened twice and then didn't call back, not because I lacked compassion, but because I had finally learned what compassion isn't. It isn't walking barefoot into the same room where the floorboards have always given way. I sent a text that said I was sorry to hear she was unwell and that I hoped they had good care. I meant it. I did not reopen the door. A month later, my sister texted a photo of my mother in a hospital gown, smiling with lipstick on, and a forced brightness that made my stomach twist. Below it, she wrote, "Mom would like to see Ava." I asked Ava what she wanted. She looked at the photo a long time. "I don't owe anyone my presents," she said. I said I agreed and would support her either way. She chose not to go. Grief arrived anyway, not for a relationship that had been, but for the one that never was and never would be. I lit a candle one evening and sat with the ache until it felt less like drowning and more like weather. The second table dinners became a small legend on campus. Students who'd never met sat elbow to elbow with retirees who carried recipes in their heads and loss in their pockets. Ava's voice grew sure as she narrated flavors and welcomed stories, laughing in the right places and letting silence rest where it needed to. I watched from the back twice when I could make the drive. The room threaded itself together in a way that felt like proof kindness is not a theory, but a practice, something you do with your hands until muscles remember how. One night, after a dinner where a 75-year-old woman told a story about the first cake she'd baked in a new country and the way sugar can taste like courage, I found Ava on the loading dock, sitting on an upended crate. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded and looked past me at the alley's string lights. "I used to think the lesson was to be tougher," she said. "But it's not. It's to be clearer. Toughness is armor for war. Clarity is a window you open." I thought of beet salad and text messages and a restaurant receipt with my name on it and felt something old and heavy leave my chest. Winter brought a different kind of test. The journalist reached out again, this time because a larger publication wanted to do a follow-up about consequences and repair. She asked if any reconciliation had happened. I told her the truth, no, and also yes, in the places it mattered. We had reconciled with ourselves and with the kind of love that doesn't require erasure as payment. She asked if we had regrets. I said I wished I'd protected Ava sooner and louder, but that I wouldn't trade the clarity we had for the approval we'd lost. The piece came out with photos of Ava's second table dinners and quotes from people whose names we didn't know the first time around, people whose gratitude read like blessing. There was a single paragraph about the earliest wound, just enough to orient, not enough to reopen. That night, I dreamed I was laying places at a table that stretched past the room's edges, plates, forks, little cards with names. Some were the names of the living. Some were virtues I was still setting a place for: boundaries, patience, humor. The next morning, a small white envelope arrived in our mailbox. Inside was a check from my sister for $327.90 and a note with one sentence: "I'm sorry for what I did." There was no but. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I deposited the check and wrote back 3 words: "Thank you. Received." It wasn't a door swinging open. It was a window cracked just enough for air. Months later, on a bright day that felt like the year turning over cleanly, I stood in our kitchen while Ava whisked a sauce that smelled like orange and winter. We were quiet in the tender way the world is when it knows it is loved. "Do you ever wonder if we went too far?" she asked. I thought about it. "I think we finally went far enough," I said. We went all the way to ourselves. We plated the sauce and carried it to the table we had and the life we'd made, and we ate with the holiness of people who know exactly what it costs to arrive. If you're listening now and you felt that ledger thump against your chest, this is what I hope for you, that you learn to close it and still feed people, that you find the second table and sit there with your own kind of courage, that you understand love can be loud when it protects and quiet when it heals, and that you never again pay the bill for someone else's eraser. If this story stayed with you, tap, share it with someone who needs the nudge to set a second table. Subscribe for more true hard-won stories, and tell me in the comments what part rang true in your bones.